Coming up this week on the Digital Lifestyle Show, we've got MarQ Speck, musician and synth player. He's going to be joining us to talk about his long career in music, going back to the 70s, and the synths that he's used over time. We'll be talking about ones he's had, sold, regret selling, ones he didn't regret selling, and some of the gear that he's got now, right up to some really recent stuff as well. So I think you're going to really enjoy this. It's a really interesting chat. Mark's a great guy, so let's get straight to Mark. Mark, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to see you.
Yeah, it's great to get you on to our Synth Chat. This is the show where we talk about synths, ones we've got, ones we've had and missed, ones we've ones we've had and didn't miss, and the ones that we're still waiting for. And it's a very apt T-shirt that top that you've got on there as well with the Moog.
It was either Moog or I had a Korg T-shirt or I got a Roland T-shirt. I go, what do I want to do? And I go, well, it's a synth talk. I said, this one makes the most sense to me.
Yeah, absolutely it does. Yeah, and so what I wanted to do tonight, I wanted to talk about synths, but before we delve into that as well, and some of the things that I can see around you, I wanted to do a bit of background on you as well, and. So yeah, how you got into music, what you're doing now in music, and then we'll get onto the tech and the synth stuff. So just start off this. So just tell us a bit about you.
Well, what's interesting, Ian, is this year, 2024. Well, now it's 2025. But I started in 1974 with the same band that I'm in right now. We just had our 50th. We call it the Golden Jubilee celebration, and we've had 50 years of my band, Sweet Crystal. Started pretty much out of college, and the three of us that started the band have been together ever since, even though we toured for a long time and then we just did studio work, and then we started coming back out about 10-11 years ago and started doing more original shows and just concerts. But I feel very blessed to have been with the same guys for that long. There's not a lot of people that can claim that and still like their bandmates. We still get together every weekend and rehearse and record, and it's a love. It's a mission for us. If you know anything about the band, it's a Christian rock band, so we feel we have a calling, and God has just kept us going all these years with really no plans to stop anytime soon.
That's brilliant. It's great to be able to work with a bunch of guys like that, and be and evolved over time, and I guess you all have different lives, but then you come together to do this, sort of drawn together by the music. That's brilliant.
I feel very blessed to be with the guys, and we started out as young kids. First thing I started playing, my parents helped me buy my first Hammond organ, and that was the beginning of my whole career, with sitting down playing one keyboard. But eventually I started looking into Rick Wakeman and Keith Emerson, going, look at all this gear, and that began me looking around, going, I could put another keyboard on top of this. And so I bought my first Elka Rhapsody, which is like a string machine back then. Yeah. So I had two, and then I realized you could buy an A-frame ultimate support thing. I said, if I put this on the side, I can add more things. So the next keyboard I bought, and the one I wished I still had, was the Moog Model D. I got it in 1976. Cost me $600. It was used, but that was a lot of money back then. And that was my first real synth, and it sat lovingly on top of everything, and I had it for decades. But as it got older and I got older, it started costing me a lot of money to keep it moving. I had to get it reconditioned. I had MIDI put into it, which was, mind bending to me at the time. But you had to keep taking it apart and cleaning the little gold tines that were in there to make sure they didn't stutter. And eventually I shipped it off to a guy in Colorado, put in new oscillators and more stable ones, the better oscillators. But it just kept causing me fits, and it was costing so much money to maintain. I finally said, right in 2003, 2004, it's never going back out on the road. I'm just going to sell it. And I found a gentleman flew here from New York and bought it, and then went back on the train so he didn't have to ship it. So I made some money on it. It's probably the only keyboard I ever sold that actually made money on. But now I look back and I just kind of go, yeah, I probably could have just kept that around for the sentimental value, like you said.
Yeah, there is that, but if there's a fine line between sort of sentimental keeping stuff and then keeping stuff that you can use. So I guess what were you sort of listening to then back when you started? and you had your Hammond, and then you heard synth. What was the synths that you heard?
Sure.
Or what was the music you heard to get into that?
Well, and if your viewers don't know, I'm from the Detroit area. Detroit in the 60s and 70s had a very, very lively local music scene with Bob Seger, Ted Nugent, the Amboy Dukes, a lot of guitar-driven bands. There were only a couple of keyboard-driven bands at that time from around here. A band called the SRC was probably the main one. Well, the first song Sweet Crystal learned as a band was Echoes by Pink Floyd. The whole B-side, the whole B-side of the metal album. Yeah. So that was how we started. So that was our first song we learned. We played live at a biker bar. I don't think they really knew what to do with us, but it was a biker bar and they were having a lot of fun. So we just kind of spaced them all out. So Pink Floyd, yes. Pretty much all of the prog English bands were our influences. There really were very few American bands at that time doing any kind of keyboard-driven music.
So, my favorite band is Genesis. So I guess absolutely. That would be one of them. Yeah.
Now, one of our favorite ones to play from them was Squonk, from back in the day, and so we cut our teeth on those kind of songs. We weren't really thinking of being a top 40 band, that's for sure, or a dance band. We were doing these kind of songs in the local bars, and I think that helped us stand out from a lot of just the bar bands that were here, because we didn't play just the hits. We played some pretty classics. Well, one of the biggest things, we did a live show during the Republican National Convention in Detroit back in it would have been the mid 80s, when Gerald Ford got nominated, and we started with Court of the Crimson King live. And Gerald Ford's son, Stephen, was actually at the gig on stage with the Secret Service police and stuff. It was very, very cool. That was who we were and how we cut our teeth, So I feel very blessed to have been able to play that type of music. And we've kept up with it all these years. The drummer Steve and guitarist Bill both love the same exact type of music. So we were even playing some very obscure bands called Atomic Rooster. I don't know if you know them. They're also, so we were playing music by that, picking up stuff that people didn't know, but they were still very cool songs.
Yes, but a bit different and not your traditional
not
rock
even
and
close.
roll type
yeah,
style.
Not even close.
But as a keyboard player, I suppose that's where my love of Genesis comes in. Is these sounds that came in. Tony Banks started with the Hammond organ or with the organs in the, but then you got the Merlatrons and the Quadras and Pro Soloist.
And there was no MIDI connections back when we started. So at my height, I had 16 keyboards on the stand, and only a few of them had MIDI, so I could talk to each other. The rest, you had to physically change sounds before you went to play during the different songs we were playing. So it was a performance. Besides playing, you actually had to be ready to go. Turn this on, make sure this is going here, turn up the filters over here. Wow. I'm also the lead singer. So I'm doing this other stuff while all these things are going on and I'm singing. But so it was a lot of fun. I think that was my education.
Yeah. And I guess then you've seen then your equipment evolve over time. I don't we've done a few of these now, and depending on the people's era where they got into it, that there are some people that loved all the analog gear in the 70s because that's what they had, and then they were quite keen to get rid of that analog gear because it's unreliable, so they went to the digital stuff in the 80s, and then it kind of came back around again, and now we're almost back around where the digital stuff that wasn't cool of the 80s is now cool again. So these things come around. So you must have seen these come around a few times.
I did. And I would say that, as you can see from behind me, my rigs have changed quite a bit over the years. There are certain things that I still love and I still have, like my Thunderbolt Roller D50 down here and a Korg Karma, which were some of the first.
Oh, my Karma's behind me there.
There you go.
Yeah.
I just kept it. I've never wanted to get rid of it because it's got sounds on it that I just adore, just like the D50. And I know there's software now that can emulate a lot of it, but there's nothing like getting your hands on these things and playing. I've been through 4 or 5 different iterations of the Hammond organ, and each time I try, and then eventually you switch them out. My original one, the Portavie, was the only tone wheel organ that I had, and it just eventually just died from years on the road. And lots of abuse. I put motorcycle kickstands on both sides of it so I could climb it and get to the top synths on my big rig because I couldn't reach them like this. I stacked it so high, but it was part of the performance. But I love the analog stuff. The Moogs, I went from the Minimoog, which I kept for a long time. I went through 2 micro Moogs, had a memory Moog, had the Moog Liberation. My first guitar was the actual Liberation, which I actually sold back to Moog back a long time ago where they put it in their museum because mine was mint and I wasn't using it anymore because it came with its own problems too, especially with the cable that it had. They would break a lot and they were very expensive to replace. And I finally realized it just wasn't playing it that much. That's usually why I sell any equipment that I sell. I have a gear philosophy where I say, I buy, I try, and then I say goodbye. And I'll keep things for 6 months or so. And then if I realize I'm not like you, Ian. I'm impressed with what you do as far as coming up with original sounds and the packs that you do for these things. I'm a preset guy because I really don't always have the time or temperament to try to make something myself. But most of the songs on all of our releases are usually influenced by one of these keyboards and a preset that I come across. And I just kind of go, oh, does that sound cool? And then I write a song that features that because I really love it. But then I just bought some ear patches just the other day. I didn't realize they were ear patches until I asked you, how do I get these into multi-poly? And you go, just put it in the editor. And I saw your name on email. I go, wait a minute. This is the guy I'm going to be talking to in 2 days. I just bought this pack. That was great.
Oh yeah, because I can see the multi-poly there.
That's so funny. I just went, oh my gosh, it's the same guy I'm going to be talking to. That's and I do like supporting people that do that. When I used to have a lot of the newer Prophets in here, the Rev 2 and the 8, I would buy sounds from a Geo Sounds, a gentleman online that sells those packs, because I like to see what other people are doing because those would be inspiring to me. But I myself have always just been a preset guy, just do it.
Yeah, well, I do love Crazy Sounds. I've got my multi-poly here, and but what I tend to do is I create all these sounds, and then I'll sort of save them, and then as I'm demoing them, for the videos, I come up with ideas then, so I try and remember those ideas for use for my own songs later, because it does spark. I always find whenever you get a new synth or a new bit of gear, it does spark ideas, doesn't it? So
for the most part, but that's some of the reasons that some of the newer things that I've gotten have not survived that long in my environment, because I will go through the sounds and see what they're doing, and I realize after a while there's really nothing here that inspires me, and in order for it to probably not be profitable, but to be fun to keep, I will have to go into programming. And I realize at my point in my life, I don't have that kind of time. So I just kind of get rid of them, and that's happened with a few. And I don't want to say which ones they are because I don't want to offend anybody. But, I've gone through some pretty big name things, and it just went, it's just not for me. And the stuff I like, I'll keep, even if I don't get around to using it a lot, I know it's there. I adore the Chord Chronos. I have 2 of them, and I'm waiting for the new version to come out because I'll buy another one just because these guys was 10 years old and getting rather long in the tooth. But there are some things I love to keep around. And of course, the Moog Voyager over here, the subsequent 37 over there. So I try to keep the more current Moogs around as well.
Yeah, because there. I mean, you mentioned when you were talking about some of the Moog stuff you had, the memory Moog. Probably, I remember watching that when I was a teenager. There was a program on UK TV called Rock School. I think there was an American version of it as well, and it showed like Jan Hammer in the studio, and he had a memory Moog, and I was a big Miami Vice fan. I still love Jan Hammer music, but I hope that memory Moog always looked really impressive. But I from what I've read, it was pretty unreliable.
It took a lot of care and maintenance. And back in those days, we traveled a lot. We had a 4-man road crew, 6.5 tons of gear, and we were playing 5, 6, 7 nights a week, 3, 4, 5 sets a night. I made a living at it through all the 70s into the 80s. And it took a lot of abuse. Those keyboards took a lot of abuse. Each one had their own case. And then I had one huge case that you could put 6 cases in standing up on their end. We called it Bertha. And you had to be very careful pushing it up the ramp because it was so heavy to get it moving. You had to push it hard. And if you're at the top of the ramp and didn't get your feet out of the way, we crushed a lot of people's toes with that thing coming up over the ramp. But So those things took a lot of abuse coming in and out of the clubs. There was a different scene back then because you could play for an entire week at a club, and you were the entertainment. Nowadays, it's a whole different ballgame. But we could set up and leave the gear there, which was nice. Come in each night and perform, and we tear it down and put it in the truck. And we did that for probably 12, 15 years. I made a living in it. So I felt very blessed to have been able to do that. I think that's why the band got as tight a musical group as we were, because we played all the time. And it's a little different nowadays for bands just starting out, especially because they don't have those kind of venues anymore, at least here in the States.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess then, so the kit that you had took a lot of abuse over time, and I suppose for you then, you couldn't be too sentimental about it if it's like you mentioned with the other ones. If it starts to break, you've got to look at getting something new. And I suppose especially when you got into the early 80s, some of that 70s kit, despite it now being sort of classic, then was seen as being old hat and not what you want.
And it's funny. I remember one of the first digitals I got was the Korg Poly 800. And I just found it at a music shop in Battle Creek. We just happened to be playing there. And I walked in, it was just like a little mom and pop shop, and they had one there. And I started playing it going, oh, this is pretty cool. It had the new MIDI in it, well, I can connect it to the Prophet 600, which I was playing at the time. And I took it out, and it had one patch on it that was so dynamic to me that we wrote the opening cut of our very first release, Power and Glory, because of that synth and the tone that it had. But it was a toy, it didn't survive long at all because it was all plastic. And, and I like to call my type of playing, I call it full contact keyboards, because I'm kind of aggressive. That's why I don't play weighted keys, because I'll probably break my fingers before I break the keys. But I play synth and organ style keyboards, and I'll snap a few here and there because I'm pretty aggressive. But like the Poly 800, I love the way it sounded, but it just didn't survive my playing style. So you just got to move on.
And then, so in that sort of mid-80s thing, then did you get to the stage where you kind of ditched your analog gear and replaced it with the classic DX7 or kind of mid-80s?
I never had a DX7. I never did. For some reason, the only Yamahas I had back then was the TX7 module. Which was
I've got one of them over there.
There you go. And so that was the sounds without the keyboard. And then later on, I got a TG33, which had a lot of nice little tones on it, but it's it's not real super. I never had a DX7, but yeah, slowly things started fading away as I started learning about using computers on stage. And I had a friend who was using the first Mac SE. I'd never even seen a Mac before, and watched what he did. I went out and I bought a Commodore SX64. If you remember the Commodore 64s, the SX version was the one that had little 5-inch screen. You could open up the lid. That was the keyboard. It took floppy disks, 5.5 or 5.25-inch floppy disk, and it was one piece. And I had a little MIDI interface, and I hooked it up to my D50 and Sonic, the ESQ, and it ran those to a Roland U110 module. And that was when MIDI was there. And you could do one song at a time, and I'd have to load the next song while I talked. So I got very good at talking to the crowd while this thing was loading the next floppy disk, and that was what started it. And then I realized that's a whole new ball game, because then we went through, up until our current bass player Marty, we went through 13 bass players over the course of Sweet Crystal.
Very Spinal Tap.
It was incredibly Spinal Tap until finally the late 80s, 90s, we finally said, forget it, we're going to let the computer be the bass player. And that's when I started programming bass tones on like an EMU Proteus module for the bass. And it was just the three of us, Steve, Bill, and I, for well over a decade. When I'd like to call us one of the first Christian rock power trios, at least in Michigan. So that was interesting. And that's where MIDI came in very, very handy. By then I had put the Minimoog back in the studio. Micromoogs broke all the time. I kept snapping off the switches on them. And I found somebody who wanted them so I could sell them for a couple $100. And eventually I wish I had one back then. I'd find one, I'd buy it again. I probably bought the Micromoog 5 times in the course of my life. Kind of like, I have a Oasis Micron over here, which I really like as a little digital synth. and it's the fourth one I bought, because I'll buy it for a while and finally not use it, sell it, bought another one, sell it, and this is the fourth one now that I have, because that's kind of me. I know it sounds, I don't know what it sounds, but I have a very forgiving wife who loves my music and the message that I put out. So she says, anything you need to buy, you just buy, as long as you keep putting out what you're putting out. So she's very cool about that. I've gotten better at selling stuff that I don't need, so that I don't feel bad buying stuff that I think I want.
Yeah.
So it's a trade-off at this point in my life, which I don't mind, because I don't carry this stuff anymore. It's too heavy. I've got a real good keyboard tech that whenever we have a live show, Dennis comes over here and loads everything out, takes it up to the van. We get to the show, we help set it up, tear it down. So I feel very lucky to have a young buck to say, here, man, pick this thing up.
Yeah. And then so when you got into sort of you're playing in the 90s, then did you sort of were you sort of ditching then your synths and going for the romplers and
yes.
Yeah, so I suppose that's playing live is one thing, isn't it? You need that instant access to the sounds, but did you find that they were sort of less exciting creativity wise?
Yeah, in the studio, absolutely, because a lot of them sound a lot alike. You know, a fake Rhodes patch on any one of the keyboards sounds like a fake Rhodes patch. You know, it might sound better on one than not the other, but it's not a Rhodes. You know, there is a difference. Same thing with the clones, the Hammond clones. You know, they sound great. Everyone has its own little cool sound. I love using them, but nothing sounds like a Hammond B3 through a buzzer. It just doesn't. Just like guitars, you know, Les Paul through a Marshall, you know, a Strat through a Fender. I mean, there's just something organic about those kind of instruments, just like the Moog. I mean, every one of these computers has Minimoog software on them. You know, every one of the Nord keyboards, they all have Moog sounds that are all usable. Everything is usable in context of the tune, but you know, there's nothing like a real Moog. There's nothing like the little analog quirks, the little drift of the oscillators that make those things have a unique sound per instrument. Whereas here, you program that analog drift into it, and it's identical every time you play it. So it's not that it's bad, it's just there's not a real personality like there was from the original material that came around. And things were so unique back when I don't know when you started playing, but when I first started playing, you're right, Roland was unique, Korg was unique, DSI Sequential was unique. They all had their own sounds. Yamaha with the DX thing, everything came out with a very unique sound. None of those keyboards sounded like a Moog. They didn't really sound like each other. They tried to emulate maybe some of the patches. And I think I was blessed to be able to play and discover keyboards through that era, because you learned what each different little thing could do. The difference between a Wurlitzer and a Fender Rhodes is huge, you know, but for people today who just go, it's electric piano, oh look, it's got a Tynes patch on it. Well, you don't know what that Tynes patch is actually emulating if you didn't grow up during that time period.
Yeah, that's it. And like my first synth was the DX100
nice.
At the top there. But I always thought that I was, you know, getting a synthesizer and I would sound like Pet Shop Boys or Duran Duran or Genesis with this little DX100. It wasn't until I learned that actually they're not all using the same thing. Things are different, like you said, and all these different synths have different characteristics. But then sort of as you get close to sort of current, have you gone down the route on stage? Are you using real instruments or virtual instruments?
I'll tell you, nowadays, Ian, I'm in 4 different bands. I mean, Sweet Crystal is still my main goal, who I work with, who I record with, but I play keys now for a lot of different people here in the area. And I have one current keyboard which goes with every gig, and that's the Roland, the DS, the Juno DS. And the reason I like that is because it plays all the backing tracks or the samples that I need for each of the different bands. And it's really, really simple to program and get around. That is always the bass keyboard wherever I go. Now, the top keyboard, it's usually a 2-keyboard rig with an iPad. But the top keyboard all depends on the band. One band I take the Hammond SK Pro. One band I take the Yamaha YC. For Sweet Crystal, it's usually the Nord and the Kronos. Sweet Crystal, I like to do 3 keyboards because it's my band and I like showing off. So it's that kind of thing. But I know the Juno, the DS series is not top of the line anything, but it is. I've become so proficient at using it that no matter who I play with, I can load all of their intros, all of their backing tracks, and get to it very, very quickly, and know that for the bulk of it, sounds are cool. The organs are not the best on the Roland, so I usually have some kind of organ with me to cover that. But that's my main gig nowadays. The bar scene here, or the concert scene, it's mostly in big clubs. If you're an original band, you're one of 4 or 5 bands on the bill. That's all there is. There are, unless it's like for us, if we happen to play like a mega church or something where we're the headliner because of who we are, then that's different. Then I can bring a lot of gear and make it look cool and enjoy the performance as well. But most of the gigs nowadays here in the States are 4, 5, 6 bands per night, 30-minute sets with a 10-minute turnaround time between the bands. It is tough. It's not always fun. So what I've done is I've created mobile rigs on wheels that I can set up off stage that are all ready to go, complete with built-in mixers, DIs for the house, or what have you. So when it's our turn to play, Dennis and I just roll it to where I'm supposed to be, plug it in, fire it up, and hand the audio guy, here's your feed. You know, if you want stereo, you want mono, we play, you're done, you turn it off and get it off, and then we can take our time dismantling it. That's the kind of live shows that I deal with now. And I become used to it. It's not a lot of fun, but at least you get out in front of people and you keep your chops up. And that's probably why I play with all these different bands, because Sweet Crystal only plays so often. So now I get to play quite a bit. Plus I'm doing a solo gig now. It's very different to actually go out and play your own music by yourself. That took a little bit of guts for me to actually feel comfortable enough to think that I can represent who Sweet Crystal is by myself. But ever since I retired from my day gig, I've been doing that more and more often. So I've gotten comfortable with it, but I much prefer jamming with people because you can get outside the box, you know. So if it's just me, then you're sequenced and you're playing what it is that you put into that program.
And I suppose the keyboard requirements for live and keyboard requirements for studio are almost 2 different things. Like you mentioned, you want that that's like the Juno or whatever. It maybe it's not the best analog, virtual analog, best sample, but it's the thing, you know, it works. You can plug it in and get going. Whereas when you're in the studio, you've got more time to tinker around with the sounds, and you can be, you know, you've got more creativity there.
That's almost, for somebody like me who has such an abundance of gear, it's almost a 2-edged sword there, Ian, because I could add 127 different string sounds to a song, you know, because you've got that much around. The trick is realizing when you've done enough, you know. Yeah, well, I could add the multi-poly. Wow, I can put it on top of the Nord A1, and then put on the Moog over here, and all of a sudden you've got this wall of sound that might sound good to me because I love keyboards, but it's probably not a great selling point for a song. So I've learned that over the years too. Just because I own all this stuff, it all doesn't have to go on every single song that I write.
Yeah.
It took me a while to learn that.
I know what you mean. I quite sometimes like putting myself into sort of a limitation, saying we're going to do this song now. I'm going to use a Roland TR 505 drum machine, but you know, early 80s. So I'm going to make all the keyboards be very restricted to that era of sound. So, or maybe I'm going to do one where I'm not using any poly synths, and you kind of put those restrictions in, and then you get some sort of creativity. Otherwise, if you just go through plugins, you know, I've got the chord collection. There's thousands of sounds I could choose from. Man, it's overwhelming.
Yeah, I just bought the Juno D series, the new one that just came out, because it hooks up to the Zen Cloud, the Roland Cloud thing, and I thought, well, that'd be interesting. But I really haven't done much other than play it. Realize it's got some quirks to it that are not quite as user friendly as the last version of the DS. So I don't know if I'm going to keep it or not. But it's kind of cool to be able to go in and see all the stuff you could download. You know, I used to have the Juno, the 106, you know, and all of a sudden you can buy the software 106. And I go, gosh, I wonder if it sounds just like it. But there's a lot of keyboards that have come and gone. I wish I still had, but you know, it was a different time in my life, and I just kept looking for that holy grail of keyboards, never knowing that there probably isn't one. And I probably had parts of the holy grail all my life and didn't appreciate it as much as I do now.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think perhaps, especially as a working musician, but even me as a hobby, you back in the day, you would trade in. So I had my there's a few things I've kept, like the DX100, because it wasn't worth trading in really.
There
But
you
then
go. Yeah.
I've had a few different things, and I had a D20 Roland, which I really liked, and I traded it for a Korg, X3, and that,
Yep.
looking back now, I wish I'd kept the D20, but you didn't do that then. You kind of traded your way up.
And it was more finances too. I wasn't a rich guy. I was playing in a band. If we made $100 a week, I was happy. And so you had to be very careful with what you did with your gear. If you were buying new stuff, you had to make sure that you thought this was going to be a step up. I did find what was it, a DX? And I can't remember, 27. I don't know if that's a real thing or not.
Yeah, the 27 it's like the DX100 but with big keys.
Okay, so I found that in a pawn shop, and I went to play it, and it wasn't working. And I showed the guy who had it. I said, "Look, man, this key is broken. It falls into the thing." And he goes, "Well, you can have it for $50." I said, "Okay." So I took it home and I opened it up and popped the key back in place. I go, "Man!" So I had a DX27 for a while for $50. But then I played it and I go, it was too complex for me to program. I didn't understand those ops back then, the algorithms and stuff that they use. So I just sold it. I made money on that one. That's another one I might have made money on. But so I used to shop in pawn shops and that kind of stuff and just see what you could find. I had a Mirage, the original Ensoniq Mirage.
Oh, I have one of those. Yeah.
Yeah. Plus the rack. I had the DSM rack. Let's see, Ensoniq ESQ plus the ESQM rack. So I had them both, so I could leave the keyboards here and take the racks. The modules in the rack to the gig. That was part of the rig originally. So I loved them, but eventually, the Mirage just started dying, man. You couldn't find a floppy drive for it, and it would stutter trying to read the drive, and so you finally just kind of go, gotta go. But there's one of the songs on our Still Standing CD is all Mirage. It's called Ominicity, and it's just an instrumental at the end of the CD, and it was just all these samples from the Mirage. So I go back and listen to them. Oh man, this sounded really cool back then.
I had Mirage, and I got mine in the mid '90s, so it was when it was, it was an old synth, and no one wanted them, and I got it quite cheap, with the envisage of making sort of retro '80s music, but I never really. It was so difficult to even use to trim the samples.
Try to load it and then figure out which button you had to push to make sure you were playing what you just loaded.
Yeah. It just sat. It just sat there, and I never got any use out of it. I think now, if I had it, I would probably get more use out of it because I have a bit more time to spend on it. And, in those days, I was young, just had kids, and you got time to do all that. Maybe now, but I think, like I mentioned before we started, you do look back on some of this old gear, don't you? With rose tinted glasses. I would say I had a Roland CR78. Purely bought because of Genesis and nice. Duke album and Phil Collins In the Air Tonight. I really love that sound. And I had ideas of using it, but I never really used it because I could never get it to sync properly. I could now with a DAW, but I could never really get it to sync. So I sampled it and sold it and made some money on it. And actually, I've just ordered one of the Behringer ones. The recreation ones.
What do you think about the Behringer? I'm curious to pick your brain about that because I've had some good experiences and not so good experiences, but for the most part, I'm a little surprised at snobs that look down on the Behringer stuff.
Yeah, well, I don't personally have a huge amount, but I did get the Behringer Selena, which I've got over there. Yeah. I love the Selena string sound, but there's no way I could afford really to justify, even if I could justify that a second-hand one to myself, because of big things as well. They require maintenance, and I wouldn't get that much use out of it. So I got that Behringer one because it was really cheap when it first came out, and it's great, and I've had no issues with it. It sounds really good.
If it's got a sound that you like, that's the whole point. I tried their Model D, and that wasn't very exciting. And I've tried a few of their modules, but then they had a Pro 600, which was like the old Prophet 600, and it sounded just like it. And I just went, oh, that's amazing, man. Just this stupid little $200 module. I don't know what they cost there, but they're $200-$300, and you get all sorts of sound, just like the Roland Boutique series that they came out with. I bought the little Juno 106 clone, and it was great. It had all presets I liked, and I played with it for a while, but eventually I just went, man, I'm not going to use this anymore. So I just sell it. And somebody always gets a good deal from me. I'd rather sell something cheap and be rid of it than have to think about it for a while. So everybody who knows me, if they're looking for something, they usually call me and go, so you selling any one of these? I go, well, I wasn't going to, but if you want it, yeah, I'll sell it. I'm my own store.
Yes, yeah. So in that to that boundary, I have no issues with that. So no one's got. They're not making one. It's not like you know. There's one that you could readily buy, and yeah, having an original one would be great for that cool factor in the studio. But like I said, you've got to maintain them. They're expensive. They require electronics works done on them. So yeah, so that's the sound. It works for me. It's MIDI, USB. You know, it's yeah. So you can actually use it really easily. So I mean, I've got old synths. I've got a Gen S 1000 down there, which is a little analog mono synth. I know I bought that. I think anyone listening to the show will know I've mentioned this story. I bought it for £30 in 1988 off a guy in college. It's got a wonky key on it, and nobody will want these analog synths anymore. And I bought that, and I still got it now, and I love that. But yeah, you've got to be practical, and you've got to be able to use it.
Can I tell you one? This is probably the coolest story of my musical history. We were playing in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and there was a company there that made mostly regular music gear. They made the old pig nose amps and little things. But one of the reps came out to one of our shows and saw what I was playing, the Micromoog, the Minimoog, and they asked me, would you like to see something that we're working on? He says, you know who Keith Emerson is? And I go, yeah. He goes, we'd like to take you, come over to the factory and we'll show you something we're working on. So the next day the band went over there to see who they were. And they were building that big Moog rack that he came out with for brain salad surgery. They were actually building it in Kalamazoo at this shop. And I had never seen anything like it. You know, I had no idea what all the modules meant because I just had a Minimoog, you know. I understood it, but I didn't know what they were doing with it. They were explaining his show. But they did. It was 5-6 months later, we went to see Emerson, Lake and Palmer at the arena down in Detroit, and we had, and there it was sitting up on stage, the same exact thing. I took a picture of me standing by, not even knowing what it was, but to watch it play it. And it was so interesting because he didn't do all the tweaks on it. He actually had an engineer sit underneath the keyboard where the organ was and the controller was at, who would reach up between songs, patch, and you could see the guy's arms come up and change the patch. And then Keith would come out and play it again. It'd be a whole new tone, you know, the Lucky Man tone or the Tarkus tone or whatever it was. But it was this guy that we had met sitting underneath the thing, reaching up to the patch. So that was great. So that was historical for me because I just adored everything that Keith Emerson did. You know, that was who I told my wife before we got married, I didn't want to get married till I knew him so he could play at our wedding. But luckily I didn't wait around that long. I realized I'd lose her before I met him. So I married first. But anyways, that was fun. That was a highlight of my historical keyboard life, I have to tell you.
So I'm looking at the keyboards you've had and sold. Are there any then that you've gone through that list and thought, you know, I really wish I'd kept that one? Or do you think each time you were probably right in changing it?
You know, I wish I would have kept the keyboards that have been reproduced now. Like I had the original Wave Station, you know, and I loved it. And then I got the, what was it, SR, Wave Station SR, the module. So I got rid of the keyboard and I got the module. And then I didn't really use it for anything for a long time. And I just got rid of it, you know. And then I got the Wave Station software, and then the Wave States came out. So I wish I would have kept things like that. Those would have been. I had a Poly 6, you know. I had the old DW6000 when it came out, and each one of them had a place in our show and in our music. I could hear them throughout the releases, but just sold them because I was always looking for something. You know, and now that I don't need the money, you know, just because we're retired, everything's fine. If I still had them, I'd probably love them a lot more than when I was young. But I was always listening to other people that are out on the radio, reading what they were using. The reason I sold the Mirage is because a friend of mine got let me think about it now, an EMU emulator like that, and that was his floppy, but he could load an entire orchestra on that thing. You know, here I've got my Mirage going, well, I got a guitar lead here and I got a little bit of keyboard here. And so I would sell that trying to get into the emulator series. So I feel bad about that. I wish I still had my original profits. You know, I sold those because when the new ones came out, they were fine, but they weren't the original. You know, I see what the, I hate to say it, but then I see what the Prophet 5 is worth nowadays versus when I sold it. It's just like those vintage keyboards from a mercenary point are worth so much more, but keyboards never held their value for years. You know, it was just like a new car. You drove it off the lot and it dropped in value. And keyboards were like that too, because things came so quickly as digital came in. So nothing was ever worth what you paid for it when you sold them, but I just sold them thinking that the next one was going to be the final buy. And I feel really good about what I have here. I can cover everything right here. I've got this Roland Axe Edge, which is the keytar, you know, but it's never come out of the studio. And I used to play guitar all the time, but it was more MIDI controllers for the modules. Yeah. And so I got this, and I love, you know, I like the way it sounds, but I just, at this point in my life, I'm going, I don't know if I feel like strapping one on just to walk out on stage for a 3-minute thing and be done. So that's it. I would say that, I think we talked about the Model D, the Minimoog. And I wish I would have kept that. It was just such a expensive piece of gear to maintain. And that was hard on me. And I just finally realized it was never going to go out into the world again. And it just sat in the studio. And my tech, not Dennis, but the guy who worked on it, said, if you don't keep playing it, you're just going to need to repair it again. You have to keep playing it, or it just slowly will drift away, and the corrosion on the gold triggers. Yeah. He said, you'll have to keep getting in there and cleaning it. He said, there's no way around it. I finally said, I'm just not going to do it. I just don't care to put that much time and effort into it. I wish I still had it, because that was classic. And that was my first big investment on my own. So I used to look at it. Like the first dollar bill I ever got paid playing the key in a bar band. I got on the wall. Hey, I made a buck.
And then, are there any? So, do you buy so any of these old keyboards now, or because most of the stuff I'm looking at sort of there is fairly recent? Do you still have a hankering to sort of, if you found one at a good price, or have the prices of all the vintage stuff now just got out of hand?
Yeah, I tell you, Ian, I can't really imagine anything that would interest me enough to invest in it. If I did anything, it would be to get a real Hammond B3 down here. Yeah, I've got a Leslie speaker in the closet here, and it's hooked up to the SK Pro, but there's nothing like a real B. But one, I don't know how we'd get it down here. I'm in the basement, you know, in this studio, so getting it down here would be amazing. And that takes as much maintenance as what we were talking about these other keyboards. I mean, you just can't set it and forget it, because it will need maintenance. So that would probably be the only thing I'd want to buy, just to have a real B3 down here, but it would never go out. And so I just wonder if I'd play it as much as I do these little guys. I probably would. That would be about it. I can't imagine any other keyboard vintage wise that I'd spend the money on, unless of course it was just like an estate sale where somebody died and you walked into it and went, oh, what's this? And they went, it's a Moog Source. We can't get it to work. And I know why they couldn't get it to work. So I said, oh, yeah, but I'll give you $100 for it. And then I would do something. Yeah. But, you know, but those are few and far between. But I can't imagine any other keyboard. I once played with our band played with a guy by the name of Michael Quattro, who was big back in the 70s as a keyboard player. His sister Susie Quattro, she got more famous than him. Well, Michael was a keyboard player, and one of his big songs was Court of the Crimson King. That's why we learned it. But he was kind of sponsored by Mellotron, by the actual Mellotron people. We went to his house to rehearse, and there's a lot of us there. I sat down on the end table, and I looked down, and I picked up the cover, and it was an actual Mellotron I was sitting on, like one of the white Mellotrons. He had two of them as end tables, because he also had them in his studio, and he just said he had no room for them, so he made them into furniture. So that was my first touch on any of those things, and it was a very interesting technology with the tape loops. You know, you got 8 seconds of sound out of them, and it was just you know, to play those things, you had to actually think about how you played them, or you'd run out of audio, you know, before you ran out of a passage. But that was interesting. He also had one of the very first Minimoogs I ever saw. It was like the number 4, and it had Dr. Moog, Robert Moog's autograph on the back of it, because he gave it to Michael, because Michael was this up and coming protege who was actually an amazing keyboard player. But he didn't know how to tune it, so I learned how to tune the oscillators using a little screwdriver in the back. And so once I learned how to tune his and made some bucks doing that, then when I bought mine, I was at least able to keep my oscillators in tune, because they drift. You got to let them warm up, and then eventually, from this key's in tune with all three oscillators, this key is not, and so you got to go in the back and find the upper part. And it was painstaking. So once a month I'd have to sit there and work with that. And that was one of the reasons I finally went, that's enough of this. Although I loved it, but it once fell off the stand too. That's another heartbreak for me, man. I was playing and the thing just flipped right off the stand onto the ground. Picked it up, it's still on. I could still play, but it split the wood on both sides. It just did some awful damage to the chassis.
Oh no!
I was heartbroken. So I paid to get that all fixed by a woodworker guy. So I got it back into shape. But that was my saddest part of my life with keyboards, watching that thing fall off the back and just go, "You got to be kidding!"
And the interesting you mentioned the Mellotron there, because that's probably a good example of a classic sound that I'd love to play, but owning one I don't think would be an original. Would be as much fun, because the amount of work required. I remember Tony Banks saying he absolutely hated his and couldn't get rid of it. Rick Wakeman, I think, burnt his, and yeah. I think Yeah, but I believe he literally burnt them in his garden because he hated them so much.
And where would you get tapes? Where if your tapes were out, where would you'd have to make your own, because nobody's making those.
Yeah, but I've seen what I think I've seen them. I don't think I've actually played one, but I've seen them. But they have got, that's another instrument though that's got that classic sound. Watcher of the Skies and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
Crimson.
Because we tried to. I tried to make my Elka Rhapsody sound like that, and of course it doesn't. So I run it through a Maestro phase shifter, and then put it through a ring modulator. Just trying to get, how did these guys get these sounds? Well, they just had whole different gear than I had. But we played a lot of their music, so you did the best that you could with what you had, and I think that really helped the longevity of Sweet Crystal, because we never stopped playing. We stopped playing live for a while, just because the scene changed so much when disco came out and DJs and stuff, and there wasn't a lot of places for original bands to play, but we just stayed together. We kept doing recording work in the studio. I've had 3 or 4 different studios up until this one, and we would do soundtracks for little local shows and commercials and that kind of stuff, and we never quit playing. As Sweet Crystal, we took a hiatus from live, but now we're back out, probably playing more than we did, except for when we first started out. And it's nice because it's just us. Now we're very confident in our music and our message and what we present to the world. So I feel very blessed to still, at this point in my life, be able to get out and do what I love doing.
Yeah, it's absolutely brilliant. And I like the fact, like, you've got the multi-poly there, so you're not afraid of new gear as well, to try things out as well, which is really good, because I think it pushes you.
I have to say
that further.
This multi-poly is probably the best of the modules. I tried the Wave State. I tried the Op 6. I went through all those modules and played with them a little bit, but I didn't like it. This guy, right out of the box, just the huge pad, low end pad on this thing, right off the bat. I went, there's the sound. And so this guy is really seeing a lot of use in the next Sweet Crystal CD that's coming out. I really like it. And then when I saw, not knowing it was your patches, but that somebody had offered a set of things, and the way you described it, I go, oh, that's got to be more of the stuff I want. I just went and bought it, without even hearing any of it. So I'm looking forward. If I use one of your sounds, I will give you credit.
Yeah, let me know. I'll send you over later. I've just done a new sound pack, just released it today actually, which is Prophet 5 sounds. So I didn't have a Prophet 5 here, but I got a couple of Prophet 5 plugins. I used the templates on the multi-poly, and I recreated the factory presets and created some brand new sounds, but with the limitation of using the Prophet 5 layout. So I've got a whole new pack, but I'll send you it over.
I would be
as a
blessed.
thanks for being on the show.
When do you have time to do this kind of stuff, man? That must be a time-consuming love anyway.
Yeah, it is quick. So I have the template there, so I have like the plugin or whatever, and I've got the synth here, and I do it all by ear, and yeah, but it's good fun. So I'll send you that over later, or so you can get those in there. So it's another 50 odd patches you can put into.
Oh, how sweet! Thank you, man. That's really sweet. I need to send you something. I forgot what I can send you.
Well, it's been absolutely brilliant getting you on the show. I really appreciate you joining. And I think it's great to hear how, since things have changed over time and trends as since heavy, but you've kept with the music and kept the gear as well, which is good to see. So it's brilliant, and to talk to someone that's out there all the time as well doing it, which is
I've been watching other shows of yours, because I wanted to feel comfortable with who you are, and you've got some heavyweight programmers. I mean, some of the people you've talked to that were like responsible for keyboards that I've owned.
Yes. Yeah.
That's why I asked you the one time when we chatted, I go, are you sure you want me on your show? Because these guys are like next level,
Yeah, Pete, the Ski Jam guy, Pete Swartz, that was great to talk to the guy that made Ski Jam on the Wave Station. I think that I remember standing in a music shop, in 1990 or whatever it was, and playing that Ski Jam preset on the Wave Station. Think, how has anybody done this? But
that's funny, because I just downloaded the Korg came out with all the Wave Station patches for the Nautilus, and so I downloaded them and plugged them in. And the first thing you hit was the ski, and I said, there it is. I remember this well. Oh, that's funny. That's so cool. Well, thank you for having me, brother. I really do appreciate the time talking with you.
Yeah, it's absolutely brilliant. And maybe we'll get you back on the show when you've got some more stuff, and we'll talk again.
I appreciate that. God bless you, man. I appreciate all you're doing.
Yeah, well, thanks. That was great, Mark.